Okay, well, welcome back everyone to the last session, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome Jez Wells, who's going to be giving a slightly different angle to availability of research software, and he's going to be talking about public engagement via software. So, Gerald,
thank you very much.
You.
Yes, so it is a different angle from the last couple of talks, but since I'm going to be using some of the SoundSoftware tools, I thought I'd explain to you how I'm going to be going about doing that. So, firstly, I'll give you an overview of the Is Recording Engineering project. Whoops. And then we'll delve into some definitions of what record or recording engineering actually is. There's a heated debate to be had there, and you may well be able to contribute to that. And then I'll talk to you about how we might engage publics with engineering, and particularly doing that via software. And specifically, in this case, two that I've come up with as part of a project I'm working on at the moment. Those are a panner and a delay. So, the Is Recording Engineering project is something I'm working on with the Royal Academy of Engineering, and it's something that I've been doing for the last 9 months. I've got another couple of months left to go on it, and the idea is to engage people with an understanding of what engineering is via an activity which is seen by many as being a glamorous one, an exciting one, an interesting one. So this is part of work for a public engagement fellowship with the Royal Academy of Engineering, and these are some of the purposes that it's designed to serve. In recording, there is the recording industry, and then there is a very active sector in both further and higher education, and in schools in fact, where recording and music technology take place. And yet, there doesn't seem to be much of a connection between the two. The career pathways are not clear, and there are a number of stories of people who have arrived at a career in recording via an ad hoc route. Now, the problem with an ad hoc route is that it might not serve the person who has arrived via that route very well, and it may well not serve the industry properly either. And of course, without any other model to compare it to, then it becomes difficult to know whether students are getting the things that they need in order to go into the recording industry, and whether those who operate the recording industry are getting what they need in terms of trained individuals for the jobs that they require them to do. So, we want to begin to create understanding. We want to ask students and professionals and people in the middle what it is that they think that recording is, what they think that recording engineering is there any engineering in recording, and how can we best prepare people to go into the industry? How can we better make the link between the two? Because as I've said, there's a very successful recording industry in this country and globally as well, and there is a very active education sector seeking to train people for that particular industry, but I'm interested in whether that is happening effectively enough. So those are some of the things that I would like to do, and the way to achieve those is via some research outputs and an archive of focus groups and consultation events that I'm running with professionals. We've had a number of people come to York for a focus group. I've been to visit Tom Meister students at the University of Surrey. I've been to LIPA, which is the Liverpool Institute of Performing Arts. I've been to Glyndŵr University, which has a very strong live sound education tradition. And all of those events have been recorded and they've been archived, and then I will be transcribing those and making those available publicly. Not the recordings, but the transcriptions. Then there will be guidance for policymakers, for myself, for people who develop music technology and recording engineering courses, for those who accredit those courses, for those who are thinking of doing those courses, for those who want to recruit from those courses. And also, I want to enhance the profile of engineering, particularly the understanding of what engineering is with the general public. So that's quite a lot for me to do in the 11 months that I've got to do this project. And the software that I'm going to talk about is quite a small part of that. And of course, as I've mentioned, it's all supported by the Royal Academy of Engineering. So the software that I want to talk to you about today is about identifying engineering in the recording studio. What we want to do is to identify activities which recording engineers or recording professionals, whatever you want to call them if you don't want to be controversial, find out what it is that they do which possibly embodies engineering. And also, given that great proportion of the, well, not a great proportion, but a large proportion, certainly a much larger proportion than 20 years ago, say, have access to sound recording equipment. If you have a Macintosh, then you have access to GarageBand and Logic. If we can provide software for those people to investigate these ideas of engineering in the context of recording, then we can enhance their understanding. So we'll start with Schoenberg in the 1940s, talking about what he thought a properly trained sound man should be able to do. They should be able to study a score, build up in his imagination a perfect image of the sound of the score, and then his ear training shall then enable him or her to find out whether or not the recording harmonises with the image in his imagination, to define exactly the differences between his image and the sound of the recording, to indicate what should be corrected and how, and perhaps this is the one that resonates most clearly with engineering, to, if necessary, suggest or even carry out such mechanical improvements of all acoustic, physical or mechanical devices as might be necessary for the case in question. Now, I mention Schoenberg's thoughts on the subject because they came into being in the middle of the last century, at an early phase of recording, but also because they were expressed in a letter to the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Chicago in 1946, and that then went on to define what is become known as the Tonmeister concept. Now, there's a Tonmeister course at the University of Surrey. There are plenty around the world as well, and the firm belief there is that recording engineering should be taught in music departments, or it is most at home within a music department. Perhaps that's controversy number one. Maybe we can think of other reasons why that's not such a good idea. Recording engineers are what we are used to reading about on CD liner notes, but many engineers who work in different fields of engineering, or maybe real fields of engineering, they might say, would disagree with this point of view that's expressed up here. We engineer the music that comes out of the speakers just as you engineer the electricity that flows through devices. We are not simple operators of the equipment, it is a creative field. This is from a talk page, a discussion page about a Wikipedia article on audio engineering. And this is the response from someone else. You don't design anything, you are not creating new equipment and technologies. Yes, you do a creative job, but it is still not engineering. And perhaps that is the crux of this debate, is recording engineering. The extent to which recording and what recording engineers or recording operators, whatever you want to call them, do, embodies engineering as a discipline. So, when you ask people to define engineering, very often the answer is it's the application of numeracy and scientific knowledge to the solving of particular problems. A guy called Lewin went a bit further than that, and he said actually engineering is a third discipline, and it can be said to predate science, science still being relatively young, at a mere 200, 300 years old. And man's development has been and still is determined essentially by his capacity to make artifacts and improve upon his environment rather than the systematic accumulation of knowledge. So if we follow what Lewin is saying, then he is saying that science is not necessarily a part of engineering, although science is the latest incarnation of the systematic use of existing knowledge and understanding which engineering adopts in order to come up with these new solutions and innovations. I'm going to talk very briefly about software engineering because this is a talk about software ultimately, and so it's interesting, because there may well be some software engineers in this room, to look at the definition from the IEEE Computer Society of what software engineering is. The application of a systematic, disciplined, quantifiable approach to the development, operation and maintenance of software. That is the application of engineering to software. So that suggests that engineering is systematic, it is disciplined, and it is quantifiable. And John Robinson, who was until recently head of department at my institution at the University of York, also believes that engineering is part of rhetoric, or put it the other way around, rhetoric and intellectual capacity are part of engineering. And the difference between an engineer and a non-engineer, or one of the differences, is that an engineer can explain why a particular solution to a problem is the best. They have not arrived there by some kind of ad hoc method. They can explain to you how they arrived at that solution and how they were able to reject the other possible solutions to the problems that were also available to them. So at some point we have to decide where we sit in terms of whether recording is engineering, and I'm going to hedge my bets and say it partially is engineering. I'm sure there are lots of things that happen in recording studios which are not actually engineering, and it may well be that there are plenty of CDs out there who have had no engineers working on them at all. But I do also think that there are, and there can be, and there could be more areas of activity in the recording studio where engineering does occur. And if we break things down into 3 stages, which Lewin breaks them down into, we have an operator. So an operator in a studio is someone who knows where the on button is and is able to dial up some presets and can read off of a screen and say, yes, that's a chorus, that's a flange, and press some buttons to recall a particular preset. A craftsperson, according to Lewin, is someone who is able to use great skill but always produces a preconceived result. They always knew what they were going to create in advance. Whereas an engineer is the application of science, well, science now, and numeracy to repeat and innovate. Engineers do repeat because there's no point in reinventing the wheel, but they also innovate as well. So with those stages of engineering in mind, there's some software which I've come up with which enables people who are new to this field to explore that. So I mentioned this is part of a public engagement project, so how do we go about engaging with publics? It's the plural deliberately. The thought these days is that if you refer to the general public, that's almost a completely meaningless term, because there are many, many different groups within the general public, and they will require different approaches to engagement. So we'll start off with perhaps some obvious things: public lectures and talks, articles. We can write in magazines, we can write in newspapers, we can latch on to a particular engineering or technology story and use it to engage people by interesting them in the underlying aspects of engineering which feature in that particular story. We can have demonstrations, we can set up at science fairs or technology fairs, and we can have things that make loud noises, make bright lights, and we can have things that members of the publics can engage with, interact with, and do things with. Now all of those are okay, and I've been doing plenty of those as part of this project. We can give public lectures and talks, but that's usually a self-selecting audience. These are people who are interested in this subject anyway. We can write articles, and it may be that because someone is interested in a particular story, they will latch on to that story because they were able to have an interest in the original subject material. If we have a science trail or an exhibition, then we can coach loads of students, as we do every year, onto our campus, and we can send them around biology, psychology, electronic engineering, bring them into our studios, sit them in remote-controlled wheelchairs and so on, and do that kind of thing with them. But with software, we give something to people that they can take away and they can repeatedly use. They can do and they can learn by doing. Of course, I'm talking about free software. So if we invite someone to a demonstration, if we invite someone to a talk, then we can actually give them some software that they can go away and try on their own. So I'll now lead on to the software that I've developed as part of this project, and I'll explain how it links into some of the ideas about engineering that I spoke about earlier on. 2 minutes, okay. So the first one is called FranPan, and it's a panning tool named after someone called Franson, who collected a lot of the data on this, again in the middle of the last century. And interestingly, it's published in a book, or this particular version of the figure is published in a book called The Handbook of Recording Engineering. Basically, this explains what happens when we have relative delays between loudspeakers and when we have relative level differences between loudspeakers. And so if we just have a standard panning control which affects level, then this is how we move sound between the left speaker to the centre and then to the right speaker. If we introduce pure time delays, then we move along this axis. And if we have some arrangement where we have some time delays and some level differences, then we move along this axis. But I would say 99.9% of all panning controls only allow you to move along that line. Now, this experimental data is old. It was only done for a certain number of types of sound, and therefore what we can do is we can give people this software and we can invite them to do reproduction and estimation tests. So an estimation test is where you point to where you think the virtual sound source is. So by doing that, you can immediately invite people in their own home or in the classroom to actually begin to use software to verify and validate in the way that engineers in a recording studio might themselves do. So that's the first one. The second one is FlexDelay, which unsurprisingly stands for flexible delay, and it is a delay which deliberately has no presets and also has a range of controls which allow you to create a vast array of different sounds. This can create a chorus, it can create a flanger, it can create a Doppler shifter, and it can create standard delays which we commonly know as echoes. By giving people this tool and explaining to them how, by using time domain processing techniques, you can effect frequency domain effects such as flanging, which is a moving comb filter, again you can get people to engage in such a way that they are no longer operating equipment and they move to the next level of being craftspeople, people that can use tools to generate the things that they want. And once they can do that, and if they can do it with an understanding of what each of these controls represents, then we can have a situation where they move towards becoming an engineer. So that's a long preamble to these tools and then a very quick overview of two of them. But the main idea is that we can use tools to engage people continuously via software. We've not had this ability, well certainly we didn't have it 20 or 30 years ago, but we do have it now that we have such cheaply available processing power. We can make these tools available and they can actually go and do things at home which they've just had demonstrated to them in the studio, and you can make these things available online. I know we're probably out of time now, so there are some benefits which I think are fairly obvious. We can collaborate, we can have documentation which allows us to educate and inform. It's permanent, it's global, we don't have to travel outside the country, and we can have a good symbiosis with software engineering as well. There are some potential pitfalls, and that's where I'll finish.